think there's a bit of a misconception out there that low and middle income countries are somehow have a deficit of innovation or creativity. I mean, I think we know by now human genius is distributed equally, but opportunity isn't.
Welcome to the Chief AI Officer or Caio podcast, where AI mentor Sanjay Puri talks with the leaders shaping tomorrow's technology. We explore their stories, challenges, and big ideas driving change. So if you're curious about how AI is transforming work, business, and everyday life, this is your front row seat to the future. When digital systems shape nations, who designs them matters. Robert Opp, Chief Digital Officer at UNDP, joins us to talk about governing technology, scaling digital public goods, and building inclusive digital futures worldwide.
Robert, welcome to the Chief AI Officer podcast.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and that was a very generous introduction.
Well, Robert, we have a global audience. It's made up of Chief AI Officers, aspiring Chief AI Officers, policy leaders, and AI enthusiasts. So, for them to begin, can you just share your journey? Because it's a very, very fascinating journey that led you to your current role at UNDP.
I actually came to this work from a point of view as a development and a humanitarian assistance practitioner, looking for ways that we can improve the way that we do things in the world of, the nonprofit world, the humanitarian and development response world. How do we really make a difference faster in people's lives? And that really brought me into the space of innovation first. And then there's no question that so much of innovation globally right now is being driven by digital technologies. And most recently, the collection of technologies that we understand as artificial intelligence has been one of the biggest and most exciting kind of players to emerge on the scene. And so it has really been, my journey has really come from that side of really working and devoting my life to really changing people's lives in a positive way. But now, how do we use these very powerful technologies to do that?
This is a very new role in a new transformation era. In your view, to the ones who are aspiring, you said don't come in from a technology world, you come in from really a humanitarian world. What do you think are key qualities that a chief AI officer should have?
Yes, well, that's a great question, and I think that for me and the industry of the international organization environment that I work in, the United Nations system, the most important thing is really to understand that this is a process of change and transformation. And change and transformation processes are supported by technology, but they're not driven by them. In other words, it has to be a human endeavor. And so, as I think any chief AI or chief digital officer that is working in any industry, in any company, one of the most important qualities is to not just understand what's going on the tech side, but to really understand how to move the levers of behavior and how to understand organizations that will resist change, because that's natural that people don't want to change or resist change, and really understand then that this is a process where people need to be brought along, and you need to really understand how technology can be seen by them as making their lives, their jobs, their impact much better and more effective. And if you can understand that human side of things, that is a huge asset for anyone in a position like this, I believe.
So let me talk about something that you said about how you watched your dad spend 3 days manually organizing seed inventory when a $3 spreadsheet could do it in 20 minutes. This is in Alberta. And tell our listeners, because it comes back to the same point as you said about understanding for chief AI officers. And there's a big lesson in that story about really not technology for technology's sake. So I would like our listeners to please tell them that story.
I actually come from a farming background in Canada, Western Canada, where I grew up on a grain farm, family farm, and did a lot of farming when I was younger and even into sort of early adulthood. We were managing change even in the context of the farm. It's sort of the key to having people move along and come along with the change is making them understand that as I said before, this can make their jobs easier. This can make life easier. This can have more impact. And so, watching my dad go through this sort of process of early digital shifting to spreadsheets and things like that is, you know, these are important things that suddenly you can really accelerate what you're doing by the implementation or the leveraging of a simple technology, or maybe not so simple, but something that is worth putting the time and the investment into to get something out of it. And that is at the key of how organizations themselves actually come to change and actually come to a behavior shift. And we're actually dealing with this right now across all of UNDP, where I'm, chief digital officer, where we're running upskilling programs. But of course, the upskilling can't be isolated from what people actually do. So, what we're trying to do is build in very practical kinds of examples of how, if I am faced with this situation, which is very common in our work, whether it's my dad looking at seed inventory or whether it's a UNDP program officer looking at how to change policies with governments and deal with them at a country level, if you use AI or digital in a certain way, that will unlock this pain point that you've always had. And you need to turn people from skeptics into promoters. And so it's all about the practical application of these things. When people get that sense of what can be done, then suddenly it changes the parameters from being, I have to, I'm afraid of this, it's going to impact my job potentially negatively, into this could make me the star. This could actually make a difference for the bottom line. This could actually, really facilitate and overcome some of those pain points that I've had for a long time.
So there was a point where your dad said, I don't want to use something I don't trust. And that's the same thing. The trust factor, if you see a lot of different polls, and surprisingly more in Western economies, less per se, maybe even in the global South, for chief AI officers who are dealing with the same thing, because they have employees who are worried that if they use some of these things, their jobs could be obsolete, etc. So for them, what suggestions do you have to build that trust factor that you were able to learn from your father saying, I don't want to do something I don't trust?
Getting into people's hands the actual ability to work with the technology and firsthand experience the outcomes or the results that come from that. That is probably the biggest issue. The other thing, though, is it's around, you know reassuring people that they are still, or they still have agency in this. So, using a technology does not take away their humanness. And it probably, if they use it correctly, it won't take away their job. It actually enhances their job. Especially, and I think this is especially true in the AI phase that we're in right now, which is, of course, people are worried that this technology, especially generative AI, that can do all sorts of things that are, that it can write well, and it can, draw lessons learned, and it can, do reports and all of those sorts of things. The issue, though, is getting people and employees to the point where they understand, actually, this isn't a replacement issue. This is an enhancement issue. And for those people who can really understand that enhancement, they will start to trust that technology really to kind of push them and propel them forward, as opposed to kind of make them hide in the corner and hope that it doesn't happen to them. So, it's sort of really understanding the practical and feeling the practical result of what can happen if I trust this technology and really realize that it's an enhancement to my work, not a blockage to it or a replacement for it.
Robert, just briefly, are you surprised that Western societies have more skepticism than you look at the global South countries towards something like AI?
I was a little surprised, and we did a survey last year related to one of our reports called the Human Development Report, and that's a kind of the flagship report for UNDP every year on some theme around human development. Artificial intelligence was the theme last year, and so I encourage people, to look up that report if you're interested in it. It was really, we did this survey of quite a few countries to look at attitudes toward AI. And we found that essentially two-thirds to three-quarters of people in low and middle income countries around the world are actually optimistic about AI and sense that it will make a difference for them in areas like education, healthcare, and those kinds of concrete impacts over the next couple of years. That does contrast a little bit. Like we also found there was net optimism in Western societies or developed countries, but we can see that there's I think more skepticism and more fear, and we see that also in the news cycle coming out. People are really starting to kind of push back and things in the global south countries, low and middle income countries, they really sense in a way that they have a lot to gain from this because they're often working from or living in economies that are not as strong, do not have institutions that are as strong. They actually think that this could come in and support and really make those things better, get them faster access to bank accounts and loans and healthcare and all of those kinds of things. Whereas I think in more developed economies, it might be, and I'm just speculating here, but it might be more of a sense of we have more to lose because those things are already at a certain level. So I mean, we haven't gone in to analyze the exact kind of motivations and feelings behind that, but that's my kind of speculation around it, at least. Just in general, I would also say I think there's a bit of a misconception out there that low and middle income countries are somehow have a deficit of innovation or creativity. I mean, I think we know by now human genius is distributed equally, but opportunity isn't. And so I think it doesn't take much in the countries where we work across Africa, Asia, Latin America, Central Asia, etc., to really see how much incredible creativity and how much genius is out there. And so, again, it's the kind of thing where I suspect that part of what the survey findings are revealing is that people are ready to go. People are innovative, people are creative, they're trying to solve problems. They see they'll use any opportunity to do that. So I just wanted to make that clear because that is an incredible source of inspiration for me and my colleagues as we work with these countries around the world.
We have now international frameworks like the Global Digital Compact taking shape. How do we reconcile global AI governance ambitions with the need for locally relevant and culturally sensitive AI policy, especially in the global south, where the ecosystems are still emerging through the initiatives like you have for the AI Hub?
No, think this is a great question, and we have to understand that everybody, in the sense, is building the proverbial airplane while we fly it. And there's a whole set of global discussions going on right now. And just for your listeners who may not be aware of that, the Secretary General of the United Nations has really called for a global discussion around AI governance. And I think that is extremely important because, this is a life changing, planet changing, powerful set of technologies here that are, from what we can tell, only getting more and more powerful. So we do need to understand at a global level what are the kind of red lines for us? And that ranges from things like usage of AI systems for autonomous weapon systems, to, how are we going to handle, cooperation across borders and trade with AI and things like that. So that is a level of global discussion that has started and is going on. It's a bit fraught right now, obviously, because of the geopolitical context in which we find ourselves, but that will have to play out. Meanwhile, countries around the world are needing to make choices right now about how AI is incorporated into economies, how AI is either facilitated and encouraged or regulated and controlled. And every country is asking those questions and trying and needing to make some of the policies and frameworks around that. We take an approach where we're there to support countries to make the right decisions for them. But we, of course, as United Nations agency, have at the heart of what we do the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the importance of inclusivity and leaving no one behind, the importance is in general of putting people at the center of whatever you do. So whatever policy you're making, people need to be thought through at the center so that everyone in society is able to benefit from the policies and the implementation of the policies and so on and so forth. And what that means is that in many countries, we've started engaging with them when they invite us to, because we serve to their invitation. We've started talking about what are the local policies, the local frameworks that can be implemented that respect all of those things I mentioned, the human rights, and all of those kinds of frameworks that really ensure that people are not left behind by this. And sometimes that is requires things like capacity development. So we have to build actually the capacity of policymakers themselves to understand the kinds of frameworks that they're building, even lawmakers, meaning we have started training and working with parliamentarians on understanding AI technologies so that they can govern those better. There's also, making sure that countries are set up with the right digital infrastructure and that they've got kind of the right data architecture and that sort of thing that will actually allow them to unlock the benefits of AI and help facilitate. And we also look across how do countries learn from each other? How do they share? How do they exchange with one another? Because countries are asking the similar questions, not always identical, but similar questions. And so, where you've got countries that have kind of similar contexts, and even in cases where there aren't, it helps to understand what others are doing. And so, we try to bring those countries together. And so, it's all this sort of helping to get the enabling environment right so countries can take the right decisions for them on that issue of making sure we have safeguards where we need them, but making sure that AI is being actively able to be used and accessed and build the next phase of the digital economy.
Robert, what bold policy interventions, for example, open source requirements for foundational models or regional data trusts or multilateral financing, do you think the US should champion to make sure the AI dividend truly reaches the global south and accelerates sustainable development? We don't want AI benefits to be unevenly distributed.
Uneven distribution is really one of the things that we're very seized with right now. And so the and just to before I answer your question, just to kind of frame that up a little bit the way we look at it, every projection that I have seen that's out there right now in looking at how AI will contribute to the global economy over the next 5+ years shows that there will be an unequal distribution of the economic benefits of AI. And we look at that and say that, you know, not only does that kind of skew to sort of certain parts of the world, and we know where countries are leaping ahead with AI and the countries that are able to afford to kind of really invest, and we know that not every country is in that situation. But we believe that there are a set of things that we can do as a global community that will help to kind of make sure that people that countries and their populations are not totally left behind from the benefits of AI. And those things are, interventions like trying to make sure that data sets are more accurate and representative. And I already referred to that at a country level. That means often working with government data or national data that may be locked up in silos. But if we unlock it, then it can help businesses build off of those kinds of things and so on. But it's also looking at the language, low resource languages, and how languages are incorporated because many of the large LLMs are able to kind of do quick translation of languages, but really understanding the cultural context of languages means that you have to have a lot more data. So we were looking at what does it mean to get more data openly available and freely available on that side of things. There's a compute issue and access to computing power and affordability of computing power. And we think a lot more can be done when it comes to partnerships and investment patterns to make sure that continents like Africa, that are currently home to 1 to 2% of the world's data centers, but 20% of the world's population, are able to make sure that they can handle and make available the compute demand that is going to arise as innovators come online and want to do more. And then the final thing I would say is really doubling down on capacity building. And this is something where I suspect it's likely going to be a combination of public and private financing to do this. And we do see that companies like AWS and Microsoft and others are already offering, skills programs and things like that because they need workforce and they need people who understand those kinds of systems and things as employees, but also as consumers. But we need to really frame that in a bit more of a kind of, I think, bold ambition kind of thing. It needs to really start, as I said before, with lawmakers and policymakers, all the way down to citizens at the local level or community level. We need to really double down on getting people able to understand, able to use, able to adopt those kinds of platforms and even build them. You mentioned open source. We at UNDP do not take a view that things must be open source or proprietary. It depends a lot on the context of where you're working, but we believe there should be a very strong open source market available. So, we look at things like digital public goods and making sure that countries that may not be able to afford proprietary platforms are able potentially to adopt a technology platform that's open source, has been developed by another country or another kind of circumstance and context, and be able to use those appropriately in their context. So we try to look at those levers of how do we make sure that it's kind of closing the AI equity gap rather than making it wider and then making inequalities globally worse.
I have a lot of guests that come in from different countries, leaders of countries, etc. They say that AI is basically trained on 70% on English, Western driven data. My country has a history of hundreds or sometimes thousands of years. My new generation is coming up on this. How do I make sure my history, my culture, my dialects, etc., are protected? And this is not just from Africa. I'm talking even in some cases from Europe countries like Finland and others who have that kind of stuff. So that's one question. The other question is I get from tech folks who say we want to push sovereign AI. But I'm just thinking if I'm Trinidad, Tobago, or Bhutan or some other countries, how do I afford sovereign AI?
The issue around concern about is my history and culture and language reflected in AI systems. I mean, this is a huge issue because we in the UN, development is not just a growing digital economy. It is really about the reaching your full potential as a human. And part of that is your cultural, realization as well. And we really work with a lot with communities around the world, including indigenous communities, but also just, you mentioned a couple like, Finland, Iceland, Lithuania, not to mention, Congo, Ghana, and others with, languages that really reflect a culture. They're not well represented in the kind of training data of any of the large language models right now. It's not to say they're absent, but they're in nowhere close to the level of English and some of the other predominant languages. And so we really do need to question, I think, as we build, if we consider that artificial intelligence is going to be a very important part of the future of humanity, which is an assumption that I make, then we really need to pay attention to the representation and representativeness, if I could say it that way, of the systems we build for the entire set of cultures of humanity. Because otherwise, we will end up with a predominant kind of culture that comes from one context, and that just becomes in every interaction that you have, especially with the Gen AI system, but also other systems. It just will not work as well to solve problems as effectively in the global south, but it also will potentially represent worldviews that are not shared by every culture either. And so this is to address that, it really becomes more about how do we get robust and representative data sets that are more representative into the training data of systems that are built around the world. On your point about data and AI sovereignty, there's a challenge because sovereignty is not well or universally understood, number one. So we lack a common definition of what that means. But the reality is countries are asking themselves, what do I need to do at a national level to try to kind of compete or not fall behind or make sure I've got the right conditions to use AI? And again, I mentioned before, every country is going to have a different answer to those questions, but the kinds of parameters they should consider are very common. And they include things like, should I make a large investment in an LLM myself, like a sovereign LLM? Should I trust my data to big tech? Do I have enough electricity to power data centers that I would need for, massive expansion of AI? Um, what we are trying to do, and this is being built as we speak, we are trying to help countries understand those choices, understand the options they have, and to make the right decision for them, as I said before. Because it's not going to be the same if you're a small island developing state in the Pacific as opposed to if you're, Mauritania in West Africa, or indeed if you're India or South Africa, right? So countries are asking these questions, and we want to put ourselves as the UN in a position where we can help them uh, go through those choices. Again, putting people and human rights and those things that we care about at the center to make sure that people aren't left behind when they make those kinds of decisions.
You have gone from running localized innovation pilots to leading the AI Hub for Sustainable Development. What capabilities, mindsets, and institutional changes are required to move from something that works for 188,000 refugees to designing systems for 500,000 African startups for a chief AI officer or a chief digital officer?
UNDP is a $5 billion organization, but the AI Hub for Sustainable Development and the work we do is not quite 5 billion. We we want to get there, but we're at several orders of magnitude. I mean, your question is still valid at several orders of magnitude where I was before, and I think the issue there, if you're asking about the kind of the mindset, is there's actually, I find, a continuum from solutions development or solutions innovation up to systems change. And ideally, they all connect because you need point solutions to drive broader systems change, which is essentially what we're dealing with in UNDP and working with countries at that level. But the mindset shift is really more around, can I understand that things don't happen in isolation? They happen, it's a whole ecosystem of complex interactions between public sector, private sector, civil society. Within governments, there's dynamics. Within private sector, there's dynamics. You need a combination of financing. You need you need technical skills. You need the legal processes. Like when you're dealing with a solution, a point solution, you don't have to account for all those things. You're just kind of really working on, can I build the technology that will allow me to do this with what I have? But really being able to scale and turn it into a driver of systems change, it just involves understanding the ability to zoom out and see that there are so many of these complex interactions. And I can't say that there's one skill or mindset that is possible to kind of quickly take a course in Harvard and learn it and then come back and do it. It's just something that you have to kind of work with over time. And importantly, it comes a lot from interacting with other people and listening to other people, because everyone from the financing sector or the legal side or whatever, they have their view, and you need to start aggregating that into a systems view that will allow you to really put those point solutions into context and draw that line of continuum.
One theme that came in is that you consistently emphasize that people's rights must be at the center of everything when deploying AI. You know, privacy, consent, human oversight, non discrimination, and others. But for chief AI officers that are operating in market driven enterprises, some of these things get interpreted as compliance overhead or slows us down or just push us behind competition. How do you operationalize this, or how do you kind of balance this? You're sitting in UNDP, we are in a cutthroat, let's say, retail environment.
What I would say to market players is that firstly, inclusion, like I understand the commercial imperative. Ultimately, though, I believe that inclusion builds trust, and trust builds markets. Meaning, if people see, if your products are built in a way that includes the broader viewpoints, worldview, the kind of the data sets, the kinds of, they're not being left out. That actually turns into trust for your product, and it turns into more consumers as you move forward. I really believe that in the grand balance sheet of the way AI is going to expand, that having a global market is going to be better than building national markets. And I think that it's very possible to see that having more users of artificial intelligence worldwide, using systems that are more inclusive, reflective, representative, is actually going to be better for business ultimately. I think the challenge comes when companies are driven by very short time horizons and potentially venture capital that, or other forms of financing that really demand a quick return. And so you don't necessarily have the luxury to think about the kind of the long term. But I ultimately believe that if you're building your systems with privacy as part of the design, that you're building your systems that are that they're able to respond to and reinforce human rights rather than infringe on them. And that's, honestly, that's not too hard to do, right? I mean, I think human rights should be the floor of what we want to do, and takes into account that there will be a lot more consumers coming online for a lot of other places, and it's important to build systems that serve them, and it will be good for business over time.
Robert, McKinsey found that 10% or whatever the percentage is of AI use cases make it past pilot stage. Your own work has moved initiatives from pilots to enterprise. What explains the vast graveyard of pilot projects? Is it technical debt, organizational resistance, change management failure, unclear business cases, or something entirely different? I mean, what would you diagnose and help these CEOs who are listening to you right now?
This is not specific to AI. This is much more about how organizations adopt innovations and scale innovations in general. And in my experience, the only way that you really get to scale in organizations is, one, you have a very strong owner in the organization, that in the business side of the organization. So if you're sitting over with an innovation team or a product development team or whatever, it is not sufficient that you have the best idea in the world and that you build the solution and then you introduce it to the business owners. You have to bring them in from the beginning, and you have to plan with them for scale from the very beginning, or you're likely to go nowhere. You're going to end up in the graveyard. The second kind of option, which is much more rare and much more difficult, is where you have such a strong burning platform of change, either coming from a CEO or kind of the head of the company or organization, that says, if we don't do this, we die, and I'm going to throw my entire weight behind you, and we're going to push it into the organization. That's the other one, but it's much more rare because the reality is that in the businesses, people are busy. They have a full work plan. That was planned from the beginning of the year. They didn't count on your brilliant innovation coming in and taking resources, time, and effort just to make you look good because you've adopted an innovation that was the brilliant idea of someone else. You have to think through, what's the incentive of these people to do it? And if you turn them into the hero and get them to build from the beginning and plan for scale, that's where you're actually going to get it. So that involves a little bit of giving up the glory over where you are and turning them into the real heroes of the story.
Who should the chief AI officer report to within an organization?
Again, I'm not sure if there's one cookie cutter approach to that. In fact, my own journey, I started off the first 5, 6 years reporting directly to the head of agency, which was the best thing we could have done at the time. But as things have matured and we realize that most of the AI effort actually now needs, and digital effort now needs to align with the business, I have recently actually moved parts of the organization, and my role has been expanded somewhat to be more of the kind of business embedded lead for digital and AI within the entire programmatic side of the organization. And that I think is the right evolution for us. For other companies or organizations, it may follow a different path. But the most important thing in our digital transformation journey to date has been the strong support and vision set by the head of the organization to say, this is something of top priority, and I'm going to give my authority and put it behind this work. And to a certain extent, this person. So I was given like a lot of mandate and runway to be able to build this out. Now, I think the work that we do is almost too big to fail, and it's like becomes part of I don't want to say exactly mainstream, but it is better at this point for our scaling process to really kind of work in a more alongside the businesses of the organization. In the context of UNDP, it is better that we are closer to the business side than the IT side. Now, in some companies, and this is my opinion, and in some companies, you may have a setup that's different, and IT is already in a position where it can do everything the businesses need. But in our organization, we're dealing a lot not just with the technology, but with the policy side and some of the kind of the ongoing political engagement and programs and things like that. We're dealing with national authorities. That needs to be more with the business than with the kind of the operations and management side of the organization.
Right now, chief AI officers are under a lot of pressure about ROI. But you have to convince government donors and boards that these investments are worthwhile. How do you make the case for UNDP's AI investments?
Well, I think number one is that it's not a metric, but we need to realize where the world is going. Every organization across every industry needs to look really seriously where your client, in our case, it's national governments or communities and people, but in other companies, it may be the consumers. What are their expectations and what are their needs? And if we look at it from that lens, we have to act in this area because countries worldwide are looking at AI and saying, how can we use this for our own development? And as long as they're asking those questions, we have a responsibility to be able to help answer them because we do see this as a major lever of poverty reduction going forward. So that's kind of establishing the reason to do this. The metrics to do it or the kind of tracking success and implementation is tricky, no question. We are looking at, of course, like many of organizations will be looking at things like, can we track how AI systems save time on the part of individuals, right? And many companies are already developing metrics around that, and we're trying to do the same thing to kind of understand that. But we're also we've used the approach of we've selected a set of flagship AI initiatives that range across the different areas of the business that we have, and we want to track those and show and demonstrate that one of them involves our crisis response. So how can we better inform our crisis response with AI insights? And there will be metrics in that little project, that flagship, around speed of delivery, around cost efficiencies, around kind of better decisions and those sorts of things. So we're planning to kind of use the demonstration effect as well to kind of present examples of, if we do this in a concerted way, these are the kinds of results that we can actually get.
Excellent. Some points that our chief AI officers who are in commercial enterprises can take too. Let's go. Robert, your biggest concern about enterprise AI adoption globally?
That it's not representative.
The one metric that you think chief AI officers should stop obsessing about?
I wouldn't obsess just about time saved, because I think there's a bigger impact picture there.
If you had to choose ethics or innovation, which one?
I mean, we cannot act unethically. Like, I think it's a loser in the long term. I think ethics done right will actually be profitable.
What is your prediction? Will AI reduce or worsen inequality?
Long term, it will reduce. I think short term, we all have a lot of adjustment to do, and I'm not quite sure what the 5-year picture is, but I'm pretty sure the 10-year picture is reduction of inequality.
That's great news. Robert, and I've had so many different people answer it differently. How would you describe responsible AI in one phrase?
I think it's leaving no one behind,
I love that.
which is a term we use in the UN in a lot of different applications. But ultimately, if everything I've said about inclusion, leaving no one behind means you're including them, and in an ethical way, into these systems.
Robert, really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Chief AI Officer podcast with Sanjay Puri. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you thought. And share it with someone curious about the future of AI. Join us every Friday right here on the Caio podcast as we share more stories and insights from the leaders shaping what's ahead.